If you're the kind of person who enjoys a story that crawls into the quiet corners of your mind and stays there, you're in the right place. Go ahead and subscribe. It means more than you know, and it makes sure you won't miss what's coming next. Now get comfortable. When I first moved to Havenwood, I honestly thought I'd found the perfect escape. It was one of those quiet, picturesque towns you see on postcards, tucked into a valley carved by some lazy, forgotten river. The houses were quaint, the kind with white picket fences and gardens that were just bursting with color. The air felt clean, scrubbed free of the city smog I was so desperate to leave behind. I was running from a life that had just gotten too loud, a messy divorce, a job that hollowed me out, the constant grinding noise of feeling like a failure. Havenwood promised peace, a place to finally hear myself think. But I learned pretty quick that the quiet here is different. It's not peaceful. It's a strict, suffocating silence that everyone enforces with a chilling seriousness the second the sun goes down. I'd lived in quiet neighborhoods before, places where things settled down after 10. This was something else. This was a silence that had teeth. It was like a heavy blanket was thrown over the entire town the moment the last sliver of sunlight vanished behind the ridge. Last week I found out why. And now, the silence terrifies me more than any scream I've ever heard. My first clue should have been the real estate agent, Bob. He had this smile that never quite made it to his eyes. When I toured the small two-bedroom bungalow that would become my home, I asked him about the nightlife. He gave this short, choked little laugh. "Oh, there isn't any," he said, his smile tightening. "This is a very tranquil community. People really value their peace." At the time, I thought that was a selling point. I'd had enough of bars and sirens and neighbors blasting music at 3 a.m. Tranquility was exactly what I was paying for. I moved in on a Tuesday and the days were completely, deceptively normal. People mowed their lawns. Kids rode bikes down the clean, tree-lined streets. Neighbors would give a polite, if a little distant, wave. I met the family next door, the Clarks. David and Sarah, a young couple who looked like they'd been pulled from a catalog, and their daughter, Lily, a little girl about 5 years old with bright, curious eyes. They seemed friendly enough, but there was this tension in their shoulders, a guarded look in their eyes that I couldn't quite figure out. The first evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in these fiery strokes of orange and purple, I noticed a change. It was subtle at first. Kids playing in the street were called inside. The hum of lawnmowers just stopped, one by one, like dying heartbeats. Porch swings creaked to a halt. People moved with this quiet urgency, grabbing their mail, rolling garbage cans to the curb, their eyes constantly flicking toward the darkening horizon. It felt like watching a town brace for a hurricane when the sky was perfectly clear. By the time it was truly dark, the transformation was complete. It was absolute. Every door was shut, every window sealed. No lights glowed behind the curtains. No TVs flickered. The world outside my windows fell into this deep, unnatural hush. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. I stood on my porch listening and heard nothing. No crickets. No breeze whispering through the oak trees. Not the distant bark of a dog or the rumble of a car. The silence was so total it felt like a pressure in my ears, a low hum that was the sound of sound itself being erased. I just wrote it off as a local quirk. A town full of light sleepers, I guess. I went inside, made dinner, and tried to ignore how unnerving it all was. A week later, I made my first mistake. I was taking the trash out a little later than usual. The sun had just set, and the street was already wrapped in its nightly shroud. The metal lid of the garbage can slipped from my hand, clattering against the concrete driveway. The sound was obscene. It was like a bomb went off in a church. It seemed to hang in the air forever, a metal shriek echoing off the sleeping houses. Immediately I felt it. I scanned the street, and here and there, I saw the faintest twitch of a curtain in a dark window. Nobody opened their door. Nobody yelled at me to be quiet. They just watched. And the feeling I got wasn't annoyance. It was fear. A wave of pure, collective terror radiated from the homes around me, so thick I could almost taste it. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I snatched up the lid, my hands shaking, and basically ran back inside, bolting the door behind me. I didn't understand what had just happened, but I knew I had broken some sacred, unspoken rule. The next day I saw my neighbor David Clark in his yard. I figured I should apologize, try to understand. I walked over, forcing a casual smile. "Hey, sorry about the noise last night," I said. "Dropped the garbage can lid. Didn't realize how much it would carry." David froze. He went pale and his friendly vibe just vanished. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring past me at the woods that bordered our backyards. "Don't," he said, his voice a low, strained whisper. "Just don't. You can't. Not after dark." "I get it, quiet town," I pushed, confused. "Is there a noise ordinance or something?" He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was a deep, bottomless dread. "It's not an ordinance," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's for the best. For everyone. We don't talk about it. Just be inside. Be quiet. For your own sake, just be quiet." He turned and walked back into his house without another word, leaving me standing there with this cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The next few days were uneasy. I started noticing other things. The way people never raised their voices even during the day. How conversations in the grocery store were all in hushed tones. The way kids didn't laugh loudly or shout when they played, but had this weird, subdued seriousness. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for a disaster only they could see coming. The nights became a test. I got obsessed with the silence. I'd just sit in my armchair in the dark, straining to hear anything that would prove the world outside was still alive. But there was nothing. Just that heavy, expectant void. I started to feel like the silence was a living thing, a predator stalking the empty streets, and my little house was the only thing keeping it out. I felt watched, not by my neighbors but by the stillness itself. It was a weight pressing in on me, and I started to understand the fear in David Clark's eyes. This wasn't about being a nuisance. This was about survival. Then came the night it all fell apart. I'd been in Havenwood for about a month. The evening ritual was done. The sun was gone, the silence had fallen. I was in my living room trying to read when I heard it. A sound. It came from the Clark's house. It wasn't loud. Just a dull, heavy thump. The sound of something heavy hitting a carpeted floor. A piece of furniture tipping over, maybe. Or a body. My blood ran cold. I waited, straining, every nerve screaming. I expected to hear a shout, a cry of pain, a parent's concerned voice. I expected to hear Lily cry. Kids fall. They cry. It's the most natural sound in the world. But there was nothing. The thump was just swallowed by the silence like it never happened. The void outside rushed back in heavier than before. No scream. No cry. No sound at all. And the absence of that sound, the sound of a child who should be crying, was the most horrifying thing I had ever experienced. It was a silence that screamed. I sat there, frozen for what must have been an hour. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe she just got the wind knocked out of her. Maybe they were just being extra careful. But this chilling certainty started to creep into my heart. Something was terribly wrong. The next morning I looked out my window. The Clarks' car was gone. I watched their house all day. No movement. Nobody left for work, nobody came home. The house just sat there, still and silent, feeling empty. Wrong. After 2 days of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over to another neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable who lived across the street. She was tending to her roses, her back to me. "Mrs. Gable?" I asked. My voice felt way too loud. She flinched but didn't turn around. "Yes. I was just wondering if you've seen the Clarks. Haven't seen them in a couple of days. Is everything all right?" Her hand stopped moving in her gardening gloves. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, without turning, she spoke, her voice brittle and thin. "They moved on," she said. "Packed up and left. Happens sometimes." "Left?" I said, shocked. "Just like that? In the middle of the night?" "They didn't say anything. People value their privacy here," she muttered, finally turning to face me. Her face was a mask of strained politeness, but her eyes were filled with this frantic, pleading terror. It was a look that begged me to stop asking questions. It's best not to pry. That's when the true horror of it all started to sink in. It wasn't just that they'd left. It was the town's reaction. Nobody else seemed to notice or care. No cops, no for sale sign, no gossip about where they'd gone. It was as if David, Sarah, and little Lily had been carefully, collectively erased from Havenwood's memory. They just ceased to exist. And everyone was pretending that was normal. I knew I couldn't let it go. Whatever was happening in this town, whatever darkness was hiding under its perfect surface, had taken my neighbors. I had to know what it was. That night, my fear was pushed aside by a cold, grim determination. I waited until well after midnight, when the moon was hidden by clouds, put on dark clothes and slipped out of my house. The silence was my enemy now, and I moved through it like a ghost. Every step was a risk. The Clarks' back door was locked, but a small kitchen window was slightly ajar. It slid open with a soft groan that made my heart leap into my throat. I froze, listening to the crushing silence, waiting. Nothing. I pulled myself over the sill and dropped silently onto the floor. The house was cold and still. It was unnervingly tidy, like a cleaning crew had been through. Dishes done, counters wiped. It felt staged. I moved through the silent rooms with a small flashlight in my trembling hand. The living room was perfect. The master bedroom immaculate. It was in Lily's room that the mask finally slipped. Her room was mostly neat. Toys on a shelf, clothes folded. But on the floor, next to her little bed, was a single overturned crayon drawing. It showed a smiling stick figure family, a man, a woman, and a little girl, under a bright yellow sun. But over in the corner, away from the happy family, was another figure. It was drawn in heavy black crayon, a tall, featureless silhouette. No eyes, no mouth, no face. Just a stark, black shape. And from this shape, black lines were drawn to the ears of the stick figure family, as if it were listening. A cold dread washed over me. This was more than a kid's nightmare. This was a picture of a fear she lived with every single day. I knelt down, scanning the floor with my light, and that's when I saw it. Under the bed, pushed way back against the wall, was a small, scuffed wooden box. My heart hammered as I reached under and pulled it out. It was unlocked. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was an old leather-bound journal. The paper was yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was an elegant, looping script. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone this was it. This held the answers. I tucked the journal inside my jacket, my mind screaming at me to get out. I retraced my steps, slipped back out the window and fled into the silence, clutching the dark heart of Havenwood to my chest. I didn't sleep. I just sat in my locked house, the journal on the table, and waited for the sun. The silence outside felt different now. It felt predatory, like I'd stolen a secret from a sleeping dragon. When the first faint rays of dawn broke the horizon, I opened the journal and began to read. The entries went back over a century. The author, a man named Elias Thorne, had been one of the first to learn Havenwood's terrible secret. October 12, 1888, the first entry began. We arrived in this valley a year ago, seeking solace. We named it Havenwood, for we believed it to be a sanctuary. We were wrong. This land is cursed. Our crops fail. Sickness takes our children. The woods are unnaturally quiet. We pray to a God who does not seem to listen. My hands trembled as I read on. Elias wrote of a community on the verge of collapse. Then the entries took a darker turn. November 3, 1888. The elders speak of a presence in the forest. Something ancient. Not a beast of flesh and blood, but a god of this blighted land. An entity drawn to suffering. Our cries of grief, our wails of sorrow, they are a summons. The more we mourn, the closer it comes. It feeds on our lament. We call it the silent God, for our own noise gives it power. I had to put the journal down. My own breathing sounded deafening in the house. The silence wasn't a choice, it was a defense. I picked the journal back up, desperate for the truth. December 1, 1888. A pact has been made. We cannot leave. We offered the God a bargain. We will give it what it desires most, a world without the sounds it feeds on. From sunset to sunrise, we have vowed to offer it a tribute of absolute silence. No cries of pain, no shouts of joy, no whispers. A perfect, unbroken stillness. In exchange, the land will prosper. The sickness will fade. Havenwood will become the haven we dreamed of. The next entry was a year later. The desperation was gone, replaced by a hollow success. The crops grew. The sickness was gone. But the price was etched into every word. September 14, 1889. The pact holds. But we have learned the terrible nature of our bargain. The silence is not enough. The God still requires a sacrifice. A quiet offering. It does not hunt those who make noise. No, it hunts for the potential for sound. It seeks out a life that is capable of a scream, a laugh, a cry. It is drawn to the vibrant, noisy spark of life itself, especially in the young. My blood turned to ice. Lily. Once a year, sometimes more, it comes, the entry continued. It performs a quiet reaping. It chooses one of us. There is no struggle, no scream. If the victim were to cry out, the pact would be broken. A true, terrified scream would be a feast for the God, and the old curse would return upon us all, 100 times worse. And so, the sacrifice must be silent. The family must be silent in their grief. The town must be silent in its knowledge. We erase them. It is the only way. It is the price for Havenwood. The final entry I read was scrawled in a hand that was no longer elegant, but shaky and terrified. I have seen it. Last night it took the Miller boy. I was watching from my window. It has no form, no substance. Imagine a hole in the world, a patch of walking night that absorbs all light, all sound, all warmth. A void in the shape of a man. It doesn't walk, it glides, a silent, flowing shadow. It moved to their door and simply passed through. A moment later it emerged and I knew the boy was gone. It does not listen for sound. It listens for the beat of a heart that is afraid. It listens for the breath held back in a throat that wants to scream. It listens for the silence that is about to be broken. I slammed the journal shut, a wave of nausea rolling over me. The thump. It wasn't Lily falling. It was the entity. The sound of the sacrifice being collected. David and Sarah hadn't fled. They had been forced to leave, to take their silent, screaming grief and disappear, to keep their sorrow from breaking the pact. They were erased. And then a new, much more personal horror dawned on me. The garbage can lid. My loud, stupid mistake. The fear I felt that night, the frantic hammering of my own heart. It had heard me. I had put myself on its radar. I wasn't just a resident of Havenwood anymore. I was a candidate. A scream waiting to happen. That evening as the sun went down, a primal terror took hold of me. I was no longer a curious observer. I was prey. I worked with a frantic, silent energy, dragging furniture against the doors, boarding up the windows. My house became my tomb. When darkness fell, the silence was no longer just an absence of noise. It was the presence of that thing. I huddled in the center of my living room, every muscle tensed. I controlled my breathing, taking slow, shallow sips of air. My own heartbeat was a thunderous drum in my ears, a betrayal. Hours passed like centuries. Every creak of the house was an approaching footstep. I started seeing shapes in the shadows. I felt a coldness seeping through the floorboards. I was in a cage of my own making, a prisoner of silence. And then it happened. It started at the front door. A soft, scraping sound. It was the noise of a rough surface absorbing all vibration, like sandpaper made of pure silence. I stared at the door, my breath caught in my lungs. Slowly, silently, the brass doorknob began to turn. I had bolted the door. I had wedged a heavy armchair under the knob. But I watched, paralyzed, as the deadbolt clicked open with a muffled, deadened thud. The armchair slid back, not with a screech of wood, but with a dull, soundless push. The door swung open into the blackness of the night. And in the doorway stood the shape. It was exactly as the journal described. A void. A hole in reality in the rough outline of a tall, thin man. It didn't just block the view of the street, it consumed it. It radiated a coldness that sank deep into my bones. A scream built in my chest, a primal, desperate thing. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek and the sharp, coppery taste of blood filled my mouth. The pain was an anchor, the only thing keeping me from breaking the one rule that mattered. The shape glided into my house. It flowed across the floor like spilled ink. It moved with a slow, methodical grace that was utterly terrifying. It was searching. I scrambled backward, crab-walking away, my back hitting the wall. I slid into the small linen closet, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a crack to see through. I watched as the void moved through my living room. It was listening. I could feel it. Not with ears, but with its entire being. It was listening to the silent scream inside my head. It was tasting my terror. It turned and flowed down the hallway directly towards me. My heart stopped. This is it, I thought. I squeezed my eyes shut. It passed by the closet, so close I felt a wave of dizziness, of vertigo, as if I were looking into an infinite abyss. For a moment that stretched into forever, it paused, right outside my door. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The silence in that moment was a physical force. It was the silence of the grave. I could feel it looking at me. I knew I was there. It was savoring the moment. It was waiting for me to break. I don't know why it let me live. Maybe the taste of my own blood masked my heartbeat. Maybe my terror was so complete it had become a form of silence itself. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't my turn. As slowly as it had paused, it turned away. It glided back down the hall and out the open front door. The door swung shut with a soft, final click. And then it was gone. The oppressive presence vanished. I stayed in that closet until the sun came up. When the first weak rays of dawn finally crept through the crack, it felt like a resurrection. I stumbled out, my body aching, my mind fractured. I looked around my violated home. Nothing was out of place, but everything felt contaminated. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed a single bag, my hands still shaking. I took my wallet, some clothes, and the old leather journal. I didn't bother to lock the door. There was no point. I got in my car and drove. As I headed down the main street, I saw Mrs. Gable on her porch watching me leave. Our eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just gave me a slow, sad, tiny nod. It was an acknowledgement, a farewell, a gesture that said, "You know, and you are wise to run." I hit the gas and didn't look back. I've been gone for a week. I've put 1,000 miles between me and Havenwood. But I haven't escaped. Every night as dusk falls, a cold dread seeps back into my bones. I find myself growing quiet, holding my breath, listening. I can't sleep with an open closet door. I flinch at every unexpected noise, but it's the quiet that truly breaks me. I have been marked by the silence. I'm telling you this story because you need to know. You need to cherish the sounds of your world. The crickets, the wind, the distant traffic, the sound of your own breathing in the dark. Those are the sounds of life. Those are the sounds that keep the silence at bay. Because silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's a cage. And sometimes it gets hungry. Every night, I sit in the dark and I listen, and I pray that the void in the shape of a man isn't listening for me. Thanks for listening. If this story stuck with you, let me know in the comments what you would have done. Your choices, your fears, they're part of the story now too. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the dark. Until next time.